Okay, mic check 1 2. It's the Y2K collector, and I wanted to just talk about something that I'd been thinking about when it comes to certain retro games. And when I think about the sixth generation of gaming, that was the era of the PlayStation 2, and of course the GameCube, and then other consoles like the Xbox, and of course the Sega Dreamcast. Now, a lot of people that I know, like to debate, the difference or which console is better to purchase, especially going into 2024. And if you're thinking about starting a game collection, and to be perfectly honest, you can break these two systems down into, I'll tell you what separates these two. The main two separation or differences are going to be the multifunctional use, and then of course just the capabilities and the gameplay, and obviously the different games that came out for it that you might have the most nostalgic ties to. Now, a lot of the multimedia functionality that made the PlayStation 2 so popular and so much more coveted than the GameCube back in the day no longer matter, right? Because like when the PlayStation 2 came out, um the cost for a DVD player was more than the cost of a PlayStation 2. So if you didn't have a DVD player, you were just buying a PlayStation 2 just to be able to have a DVD player. On top of that, the GameCube really had no type of internet support. Especially back in like the early 2000s, the internet was still fairly young to average consumers. So there was no real way to like access online gaming with the GameCube. Whereas with the PlayStation 2, they did have some type of online network. And there, you could play certain games. I think you could have played like SOCOM maybe, or I'm not sure if you could play Monster Hunter on the PlayStation 2. I can't remember, but I know that there were a few games that you could play online. Neither console was better than the Xbox when it came to online gaming back then, like in the early 2000s. But just getting back to the PlayStation 2, the things that made this a better deal for the average consumer back in the early 2000s no longer matter, right? Because no one's watching DVDs today. No one's using dial-up or accessing the internet the way we did, 20 years ago, 20 plus years ago. So the landscape has changed, right? So anyone buying a PlayStation 2 today is really going to be buying it as a method of playing video games. This is going to be a gaming machine. You're buying it for the nostalgia and because you want to play PlayStation 2 games. Now, the other separation between these two consoles, in my opinion, is backwards compatibility. Now, you could get yourself a PlayStation 2, and this is still relevant today. You could get yourself a PlayStation 2 and play PlayStation 2 games and most PlayStation 1 games. But because of the way the GameCube is set up and its whole proprietary optical disc, whatever, there's no backwards compatibility here. The only other console that could play a GameCube game is the Wii, the backwards compatible Wii. Which, I mean, we could have a whole conversation about that, but we won't. So for gamers' sake, right? So for game playing sake, a lot of the things that made the PlayStation 2 stand out from the GameCube no longer matter outside of the backwards compatibility. So really the differentiating factors are going to be just like the games, really. Like what games did you gravitate towards? What games did you play? I think, and I'm sorry for this glare. I know that this glare on the PlayStation 2 is horrible, so I'm going to do it like this. But so depending on how old you were or are, is really going to determine the console you got back in the day. If you were older, you more than likely got a PlayStation 2, and you were playing kind of more mature games. I think both consoles had a lot to offer, but the PlayStation 2 easily smokes the GameCube in terms of options, just because the PlayStation 2 had way better third-party support. But the GameCube makes up for it in its iconic games. I mean, seriously, like generation-defining games on the GameCube. So that's really what you're battling here. In my collection, I have a very tailored and curated collection. So I'm making this decision based off of the types of games that I have and I like. Now, I have way more PlayStation 2 games than GameCube games just because a lot of the GameCube stuff that I have, I really got either by accident or off of a trade, just because during the pandemic and after the pandemic, GameCube was just so overhyped. Like, oh my goodness, it was like so overhyped. The prices were retarded, and I think they're finally starting to come down now. Maybe, I don't know, because majority of the GameCube games I've gotten on trade, including this complete in box basic. I think this is brand new GameCube that I picked up on a trade. I mean, this console right now is going for what, $800 or so, whereas a PlayStation 2 complete in box you could probably get for $100, $120. And then a lot of the games, right, like these games on average for GameCube are gonna cost more than the PlayStation 2 games. For me, you know, PlayStation 2 has great games like Gradius 5, a lot of really cool shooters on the PlayStation 2. I'm a fan of shoot 'em ups, so that's definitely one. A lot of really great beat 'em ups on the PlayStation 2, like God Hand. I love me a good 3D beat 'em up. I got this, Final Fight, Streetwise, Urban Reign, but God Hand is definitely one that's exclusive to the PlayStation 2. You've also got some pretty cool RPGs like Suikoden 5, a beautiful RPG with an amazing story on the PlayStation 2. And then the PlayStation 2, the thing I really like about the PlayStation 2 is that they experimented with some really cool games like Disaster Report. This is like a natural disaster simulator game. Like, I've never really seen anything like this on any other system. It may be out there, and this may have been released on the Xbox. I'm not too sure. But this is, in this game, you're basically, you know, it's like a third-person adventure game where there's no, like, you don't have any enemies that you have to defeat. You really just literally have to make your way through natural disasters. So you have to tiptoe across, you know, dilapidated bridges. You have to, you know, scale buildings. You have to literally escape a city that's been decimated by earthquakes and natural disasters. And I think this is just such a unique game because it's just so strange. It's just so odd. And I haven't seen anything else like it. So stuff like this really makes me a fan of the PlayStation 2 because you see a lot of experimental and unique games like that on this system. And so for me, I think it's great. Price-wise, you know, you're not going to be destroyed in the pockets too much on the PlayStation 2. Now, the GameCube, a little bit different. We already know there's a huge price difference in the console. Now, getting a loose GameCube and getting a loose PlayStation 2, the prices are a lot more similar. You can probably pick up like a loose GameCube for like $120 or so, maybe even less. And then the same thing with the PlayStation 2. You could probably get that for maybe a loose PlayStation 2. You could probably get for $50 or so. So the price difference isn't that great. Now, when it comes to getting them complete in box or new, now you've got some issues because the GameCube is definitely going to cost more. Games wise, I have a few GameCube games in my collection that are definitely like impactful to me. One of them being Smash Bros. Melee. I talk about this game a lot. Definitely defined a generation. People still play this game competitively to this day. So you can't sleep on Smash Bros. I think this is a great one. GameCube also had some pretty awesome RPGs like Fire Emblem Path of Radiance. I was never really a huge RPG guy, but this was one that I picked up on a trade. Graphics look great, and I've heard the story on this one is great, so I'm looking forward to it. You know, I'm always into something that's quality. And then Wario World. This is like a Wario beat 'em up game, like a platforming beat 'em up game on the GameCube that looks really sick. And I like this. I like Wario games. I like the quirky Wario games on like the DS and the 3DS and the game on the Wii and Wii U. But this was one that was really unique. And so this is like a unique one to the GameCube that I definitely am glad to have. And then the GameCube had a few shooters too. I've got Chaos Field on the GameCube, but games like Ikaruga's a classic. Ikaruga's been re-released, I think, on the Nintendo Switch. Definitely top 10 shoot 'em ups of all time, for sure. Ikaruga is an amazing game. So the GameCube isn't a slouch when it comes to having pretty good games. It's just it didn't have near as many games as the PlayStation 2. And a lot of the games that are like heavy hitters are like your Mario games and stuff like that. Now, there is one more thing that separates these two consoles for me, and I think like this one is a big one for me. And this is a big part of the reason why I don't play my PlayStation 2 as much, and it might not mean as much to other people. but the graphics, right? The resolution on the PlayStation 2 is weak, right? It's not good. I would say every other system of this generation looks better than the PS2. The Xbox looks better. The GameCube definitely looks better, and the Dreamcast for sure looks better. Like, Dreamcast games look way better than every other console of the 6th generation. I don't care what you have to say. You can argue me in the comments. The Dreamcast games were more vibrant. The colors popped. Everything just had this very lively look. PlayStation 2 games have this very dull, dreary, like dull look to them. But the GameCube, I would say, is probably somewhere in between the PlayStation 2 and the Dreamcast in terms of graphical performance. Just doing an eye test. Like, I'm not gonna sit here and argue megahertz and all the technical pieces. I'm just doing a straight eye test. If I look at both of consoles side by side, my eyes tell me that the GameCube just looks better to the eye. The colors are more vibrant, and the gameplay just runs and looks a lot more smooth. And that's a big deal for me. Now, I know you can upscale it with HDMI converters and all that jazz, but I'm just pretending that you're just giving this to someone who doesn't know how to do any of that and is just using the red, yellow, and white cords to plug into their TV and play these games. So, I mean, you let me know down in the comments. For me, it's tough, but it's really hard for me to say which one I would have to go with. It's really tough. I guess it depends on the day. If I'm feeling like variety, it's gonna have to be the PlayStation 2, and I guess that's why I ultimately kept both in my collection. But if I'm looking for variety and some action, PlayStation 2 for sure. If I'm looking for a nostalgia rush or just some really great, a few great games that I could have a good time with, it's definitely going to be the GameCube. You know, the backwards compatibility on the PlayStation 1 internally is great, but the GameCube, you can play your Game Boy Advance games. Again, the only thing is price, right? The Game Boy player and disc is going to run you somewhere around $250. So if you've got deep pockets, go for the GameCube. But if you're looking for a low-budget blast from the past, I say go PlayStation 2. But let me know what you think down in the comments. Where do you stand on these two consoles? Which ones, if you had to give one up, let me know which one you would give up, which one you would keep. I'm interested to know. I am the Y2K Collector. Take it easy.